happens to a nation when the people sworn to uphold the law begin selling it to the highest bidder? In the Mississippi Delta, that question exploded into reality after a dawn operation shattered the illusion of safety. Streets still wet with morning humidity saw armored vehicles roll through quiet towns, and residents watched in disbelief as sheriff's men they had voted for were taken away in handcuffs. The shock rippled far beyond Mississippi. In a year when security and public trust dominate national headlines,
trafficking organization out of the streets of Philadelphia, and they're going to stop pouring guns and chemicals and drugs into our communities, and our children are safer today.
And with Washington insisting on a crackdown against corruption under the Trump administration, the revelation landed like a national warning if law enforcement can be bought what remains of America's shield against cartel influence. The event began with a single discovery: 14 police officers and 2 county sheriffs secretly working as armed escorts for what they believed were Mexican cartel cocaine shipments. According to new reporting from Reuters, BBC, and The Guardian, these officers used marked patrol cars, flashing lights county authority, and their sworn positions to move supposed narcotics along Highway 61, clearing intersections and blocking traffic as if performing legitimate operations. What looked like official police convoys were in reality a protection racket. Bribes range from $500 to $37,500, sometimes even disguised as campaign donations. The badge had become a commodity. The key developments unfolded over 2 years, beginning in 2022, when the FBI's Jackson Field office launched Operation Delta Narvo after arrested drug dealers complained that law enforcement officers were demanding bribes rather than arrests. Investigators were skeptical criminals rarely exposed their own suppliers, but the same names kept surfacing: deputies and Humphreys County officers and Greenville Highway Patrol troopers, even elected sheriffs. By early 2024, undercover agents posing as cartel couriers had documented multiple escort runs carrying what officers believed were 25 kilograms of cocaine into Memphis. Each run was recorded, each payoff logged, each conversation captured with forensic precision. Strategically, the implications were severe. Analysts from DW and Al Jazeera note that corruption of this magnitude undermines America's internal security architecture at a time when drug cartels are expanding influence across borders. A sheriff's badge is not merely a local symbol, it is part of the national firewall protecting the US from transnational threats. If that firewall can be breached with cash, the credibility of American policing, and by extension American power, takes a direct hit. At a global moment when the Trump administration emphasizes law and order and restored US strength, this scandal exposed vulnerabilities cartels dream of exploiting. But beyond the analysis, the human impact has been visceral. In towns like Belzoni, Greenville, and Hollandale, residents say the arrests confirmed long-held fears. Traffic stops that felt like shakedowns, officers who looked the other way, justice that depended on favors. Churches held emergency meetings, community leaders demanded federal oversight. Every open case involving these officers is now under review, putting trials, convictions, and even past victims in legal limbo. When trust dies, justice becomes a negotiation. And now, as Mississippi confronts its deepest policing scandal in decades, one question hangs over the Delta like a storm no one can outrun. If corruption this widespread existed undetected for years, how many other communities in America are living with the same unseen betrayal, and who will expose it next? The discovery of the corruption network did not begin with a federal task force or a Washington directive. It began with something far more unsettling. As federal agents later confirmed to Reuters and BBC News, the first clues came from low-level drug dealers who complained not about being arrested, but about being extorted by the very officers who caught them. It was an extraordinary reversal. In most narcotics cases, suspects fight to hide every detail of their operation. Here they could not stop talking. They described officers demanding bribes, sheriffs blessing drug transports, and patrol units escorting traffickers through rural counties. At first, federal agents dismissed the talk as jailhouse fiction, but the same names returned again and again, and those names wore badges. That was when the FBI's Jackson Field office quietly opened a file, Operation Delta Narvo. What investigators found over the next 2 years would shake Mississippi's law enforcement system to its core. The event unfolded gradually. Agents began mapping allegations across the Delta, Humphreys County, Washington County, Yazoo City, Greenville, Hollandale. According to The Guardian, residents had long whispered about roadblocks that weren't about safety, and officers who mysteriously appeared whenever money flowed through known trafficking corridors. As agents dug deeper, the pattern became unmistakable. Officers were not merely turning a blind eye, they were actively monetizing their authority. Key developments accelerated when undercover agents posed as members of a Mexican trafficking network. They called deputies, officers, even sheriffs offering cash in exchange for safe passage of cocaine shipments. The response was immediate. Escorts were arranged, vehicles assigned, intersections planned. In one case, officers believed they were transporting 55 pounds of cocaine a load, significant enough to devastate entire communities. The coordination was seamless, too seamless for coincidence. It resembled a system, not a series of rogue decisions. Strategically, this revelation posed a national threat. Analysts at DW Al Jazeera and Defense News warned that such corruption creates a corridor through which transnational cartels can infiltrate local jurisdictions, turning American police infrastructure into unwitting or willing partners. Under President Trump's 2025 administration, federal policy emphasizes the restoration of law and order credibility, yet this scandal exposed fractures deep inside the institution meant to enforce that promise. When sheriffs become gatekeepers for narcotics, the national security debate shifts from border threats to internal decay. For the communities living through it, the human impact was immediate and painful. Residents who once feared traffickers now fear the badge. Parents in Humphreys County told reporters they no longer knew which officers to trust when calling for help. Small business owners described years of intimidation disguised as routine checks. And in Greenville, church leaders spoke of parishioners who believed corruption was simply part of life in the Delta, a shadow system everyone knew but no one could prove. Now, with Operation Delta Narvo exposing a web of bribery stretching across county lines, one question echoes through Mississippi's rural highways. If the first warning came from criminals begging for protection from corrupt officers, what does that say about the state of justice and who, if anyone, was left to defend the innocent? The conspiracy did not rely on whispers or chance encounters. It operated like a fully functioning shadow police force. At its peak, according to federal indictments cited by Reuters, The Guardian and BBC, two elected sheriffs sat at the top of an unofficial command chain that treated cartel protection as a revenue stream. Their badges were not merely symbols of authority. They were access keys to a parallel system where narcotics moved safely through the Delta as long as the price was right. At the center were Humphreys County Sheriff Bruce Williams and Washington County Sheriff Milton Gaston. Both men had been entrusted by voters to maintain safety. Instead, investigators say they blessed cartel convoys, guided bribery payments, and used campaign donations to disguise dirty money. Williams allegedly accepted $18,000 in cash. Gaston reportedly took even more, structuring bribes through unreported contributions. Together, they formed the gateway that allowed the entire network beneath them to operate freely. The event unfolded across multiple jurisdictions, giving the scheme the appearance of a coordinated cross-county task force. But behind the flashing lights and cruiser formations was a for-profit operation. Deputies, corrections officers, and even a state trooper joined in. According to DOJ filings reviewed by Al Jazeera, each officer had a role lead vehicle trailing unit intersection control, or Overwatch. Key developments revealed the scope of the network. Former Hollandale officer Brandon Addison played a central role arranging escort routes and collecting the largest payout, $37,500. Javery Howard, who served in Metcalf and Hollandale, earned $31,000, assisting in multiple armed escorts. Deputies like Truron Grayson coordinated local patrol gaps so real officers wouldn't interfere. Others, Sean Williams, Dexter Franklin, Wendell Johnson, Martavius Moore, Marquavius Bankhead, added legitimacy through uniform state-level authority and coordinated movement. The involvement of Bankhead, a Mississippi Highway Patrol trooper, was a strategic turning point. His badge gave the convoy safe passage across multiple jurisdictions. A vulnerability national security analysts at DW and Defense News describe as an open lane for transnational criminal networks. If one trooper could neutralize state-level enforcement, imagine the scale if corruption spread further. This is where strategic analysis becomes unavoidable. Under President Trump's second-term agenda emphasizing border toughness and anti-cartel operations, the revelation that U.S. law enforcement was voluntarily acting as cartel muscle presents a domestic contradiction. A nation can harden its borders, invest billions in surveillance, and deploy task forces, but if corruption rots the interior, the entire security architecture becomes hollow. And for the people living in the Mississippi Delta, the human impact was devastating. In Greenville, residents described a feeling of betrayal deeper than fear. Deputies who once delivered holiday food drives were now accused of delivering cartel shipments. In Humphreys County, a mother told reporters she felt safer driving at night without seeing patrol cars because she no longer knew who those patrol cars were protecting. This collapse in local trust feeds a larger crisis. When sheriffs, the highest law enforcement authority in a county, collaborate with criminals, the line between protection and predation blurs. Citizens lose faith not just in individuals, but in the institution itself. And now, with the entire network exposed, one question looms over every county the convoys pass through. If sheriffs and deputies were willing to sell safe passage to a cartel that didn't exist, would they have done the same for a real one? And how many doors would that have opened across America? Long before the public saw mugshots or court hearings, the FBI had already reconstructed the entire conspiracy with military-grade precision. What began as a rumor evolved into one of the most meticulously documented undercover operations in Mississippi history. According to newly surfaced details from Reuters, BBC, and The Guardian agents spent months staging narcotics convoys, embedding recording devices, tracing cash payments, and mapping every mile of Highway 61, the artery through which officers believed 25-kilogram cocaine shipments flowed north into Memphis. The scale of the evidence was staggering: dash cam footage, body cam footage, drone imagery, audio from secret meetings, and marked cash circulating back through personal bank deposits. The event unfolded through a series of carefully engineered tests. Undercover agents posing as members of a Mexican cartel contacted targeted officers with simple proposals: escort drug loads, clear intersections, run interference, and use patrol cars to make the convoys look official. Every officer who agreed was immediately placed under live surveillance. According to DOJ briefings cited by Al Jazeera, each escort run involved a lead police vehicle, a trailing unit, and one undercover courier vehicle carrying what the officers believed was cocaine. Radios stayed silent, lights flashed, and convoys moved with the confidence of an authorized task force. In reality, every second was being recorded. Key developments intensified between 2023 and 2024. Agents conducted 3 full-scale test convoys, each mapped on a wall-sized operations board inside the FBI's Jackson Field office. Investigators logged vehicle spacing, route timing, intersection control, and officer behavior. They traced serial numbers on bribe money from the moment envelopes changed hands to the moment those bills resurfaced in bank accounts or personal expenses. According to DW federal analysts, also cross-referenced phone records, patrol schedules, GPS logs, and communication gaps to prove officers intentionally abandoned legitimate duties to assist what they believed was organized crime. Strategically, the implications were severe. Experts from Defense News and Janes noted that the operation revealed a blueprint for how real cartels could infiltrate rural law enforcement, exploit financial vulnerability, leverage jurisdictional gaps, and pay officers to weaponize official authority. Under President Trump's 2025 security platform, which prioritizes aggressive anti-cartel measures and domestic stability, the discovery represented more than corruption. It signaled a breach in America's internal defense network. If officers can be bought, border walls and surveillance systems become far less meaningful. Internal rot compromises national strength more quickly than external threats. Behind the strategy, the human impact remained profound. Agents who monitored the undercover runs described moments that felt surreal: deputies laughing as they accepted envelopes of cash, sheriff's cars blocking intersections so cartel vehicles could glide through, officers bragging about future expansion. In one recorded meeting, 2 defendants even discussed extending operations across state lines into Florida and Tennessee. For the investigators watching from surveillance vans, the realization was chilling. These were not hesitant participants. They were enthusiastic partners. And when the evidence finally stacked beyond dispute, the FBI faced a moral calculation. How long could the operation continue without allowing real harm to communities? When examples of internal decay become too clear, the mission shifts from gathering intelligence to stopping a threat that grew comfortable wearing a badge. Now, with every recording, every convoy log, and every bribe trace laid out for federal prosecutors, one question rises above the case files like a warning to the nation. If an undercover sting could expose this much corruption so quickly, how much deeper would a real cartel have burrowed? And how close did America come to losing control of its own streets? The takedown unfolded with the precision of a counterterrorism raid. Before sunrise, as fog settled over fields and storefronts along the Mississippi Delta, armored vehicles rolled into Belzoni, Greenville, Hollandale, and smaller towns where sirens rarely pierced the early morning. According to Reuters and BBC news agents, executed their warrants within minutes of one another, timed so no suspect could warn another, no badge could shield its owner, and no deputy could claim ignorance. By 7 a.m., 20 people were in federal custody, 14 of them current or former law enforcement officers, including 2 sitting sheriffs. The event shattered public perception. Humphreys County Sheriff Bruce Williams was taken into custody and later pleaded not guilty, stepping down under court-ordered conditions. Washington County Sheriff Milton Gaston was arrested as well, accused of accepting bribes disguised as campaign contributions. Their mugshots circulated across national networks, symbolizing not just personal downfall but institutional collapse. For residents, seeing men who once led parades and church security now led into federal courthouses felt like the ground shifting beneath them. Key developments unfolded rapidly. The Mississippi Department of Public Safety suspended implicated personnel. The Department of Corrections removed officers who appeared in the indictments. Governor Tate Reeves delivered a sharp rebuke, insisting no badge, no matter how politically protected, stands above the law. According to The Guardian, the fallout triggered a wave of public complaints across Delta counties as residents reported past misconduct, suspicious arrests, and interactions that now seem tainted by the corruption exposed in Operation Delta Narvo. Strategically, the scandal struck at a moment of heightened national focus on security. Under President Trump's 2025 administration, federal messaging emphasizes restoring public trust, strengthening internal defenses, and projecting American stability abroad. Yet here was a domestic breach so severe that analysts from DW and Al Jazeera described it as a structural vulnerability inside U.S. policing. If sheriffs can turn cartel escorts into side businesses, how does America maintain credibility when demanding anti-corruption reform abroad? How does the nation claim moral authority in the global fight against criminal networks when parts of its own law enforcement have acted as mercenaries? Meanwhile, the human impact expanded far beyond the initial arrests. Dozens of criminal cases are now under review. Defense attorneys are challenging past convictions tied to these officers, arguing evidence may be compromised. Prosecutors face the daunting task of determining which arrests were legitimate and which may have been influenced by bribery or personal gain. In some counties, jurors openly question whether they can trust the testimony of any officer, not just those indicted. Community trauma deepened. Churches held prayer vigils nightly. Schools invited counselors to address growing anxiety among students whose parents worked in law enforcement or had been arrested by tainted officers. In Greenville, a local pastor told BBC News that trust here didn't just fall, it collapsed. Some residents now record every interaction with law enforcement not out of caution, but out of necessity. In Washington County, businesses quietly discussed hiring private security for protection, not from criminals, but from uncertainty about who still serves the public interest. And across the Delta, a difficult truth settled in: the uniform no longer guaranteed safety. For many, it hadn't, for years. As the arrests reverberated through Mississippi, the question expanded from local betrayal to national concern. If corruption this entrenched could operate undetected inside America's heartland, how many other cracks in the system remain hidden, and who will be brave enough to expose them next? Rebuilding trust after an institutional betrayal of this magnitude is not a task measured in weeks or months. It is a generational effort. As Mississippi confronts the fallout from Operation Delta Narvo, the state faces a deeper reckoning that reaches far beyond courtroom indictments. According to analyses from Reuters, DW, and The Guardian, the collapse of integrity within multiple law enforcement agencies has cracked the foundation of public confidence, raising urgent questions about how American policing can recover when the Guardians themselves became the threat. The arrest of sheriffs and officers is not the end of the scandal, it is only the beginning of a long, painful reconstruction. The event triggered a wave of federal oversight. The Department of Justice expanded internal audits across Mississippi counties, examining hiring patterns, complaint histories, and evidence handling procedures. Under President Trump's 2025 administration, senior officials emphasized a zero-tolerance directive toward corruption inside any law enforcement institution. This political posture has sharpened federal scrutiny even further. According to Al Jazeera and BBC, the DOJ now considers the Delta region a priority risk zone subject to periodic integrity reviews, financial audits, and external monitoring from Washington. Key developments in the reform process have already begun. Mississippi legislators are proposing mandatory rotation systems for deputies in high-risk jurisdictions, financial disclosure rules for elected sheriffs, and third-party review boards with subpoena power. National policing experts told DW that the scandal has become a case study in how cartel infiltration could spread if internal safeguards fail. Some warned that organized crime groups, even hypothetical ones, seek the same vulnerabilities across the country. Underpaid agencies, understaffed rural departments, and officers stretched thin by economic pressure. Without structural reform, they argue corruption is not an anomaly, it is an inevitability. Strategically, the implications ripple far beyond Mississippi. America's global prestige relies not only on strength abroad, but also on stability at home. Analysts from Defense News and Jane's note that domestic corruption undermines the nation's ability to lead international coalitions against narcotics trafficking. If local sheriffs can be turned into cartel auxiliaries for a few envelopes of cash adversaries abroad, we'll question whether the U.S. can truly secure its own territory. The Trump administration now faces a delicate balance, projecting uncompromising national authority while acknowledging that internal weaknesses allowed criminal behavior to flourish inside the justice system. But behind the policy shifts and strategic assessments, the human impact remains the most haunting. In towns like Greenville and Hollandale, residents now hesitate when they see a patrol car. A badge, once a symbol of comfort, has become a question mark. Community leaders say some families are too afraid to call police during emergencies, worried about whether the responding officer will help or harm. Teachers report students asking if all cops are bad now. Pastors describe congregations trying to reconcile faith in justice with the painful truth that justice was sold in their own backyard. This erosion of trust is not abstract. It means slower 911 calls, hesitation during crises, a public unsure whether to cooperate with investigations. These are the cracks that criminals exploit, not traffickers posing as cartels, but real organizations looking for blind spots in America's defenses. As the Delta rebuilds, it must convince residents that law enforcement can be reformed, and that officers who remain are committed to the oath so many others betrayed. The scandal has forced Mississippi into an uncomfortable but necessary confrontation with its own institutions, and now the entire nation is watching, asking whether this was an isolated breach or a warning of vulnerabilities still hidden in other jurisdictions. Because the collapse of trust in one county can spread like a contagion, casting suspicion on uniforms across the country. And so the question now extends far beyond the Mississippi Delta. If the line between protector and predator can be crossed so easily, who will redraw that line? And how long will America accept a system where trust can be bought? Operation Delta Narvo exposed one of the most disturbing corruption scandals in modern Mississippi history, revealing that 2 sheriffs and 12 officers spent years escorting what they believed were cartel cocaine shipments through the Delta. Triggered by complaints from drug dealers extorted by police, the FBI launched an undercover sting that documented officers taking bribes, clearing intersections, and using official vehicles to shield narcotics convoys. According to Reuters, BBC, and DW, the evidence included full-scale escort runs, marked cash payments, GPS logs, and surveillance footage. The scandal triggered a massive federal takedown, resulting in 20 arrests and the suspension of multiple state and county personnel. The fallout has shaken public trust across the Delta, forcing the DOJ under the Trump administration in 2025 to expand oversight, mandate internal audits, and propose structural reforms. Analysts warn that such corruption represents a strategic vulnerability for the United States, undermining domestic security and weakening America's global credibility in counter-cartel efforts. Communities now face a painful reconstruction of trust as residents question the integrity of institutions meant to protect them. The scandal leaves a final urgent question: how can America secure its future if the corruption within its own agencies went unnoticed for